Hey there! Thank you for tuning in to Chats with Hannah. Today we're going to be talking about a very special subject. Well, that is play. Now, all of us as parents and educators know how important play is in child development, right? And we have so many different kinds of play, right? From open-ended play where there's no sort of specific outcome that we're looking at, or we have really structured play where whether it's puzzles and just these different things that have a certain desired outcome. Well, today we're going to be talking about something different. Well, play therapy. If you haven't heard of this before, I'm so glad you're hearing it on our channel. And to talk about it, I have a really special guest, Lucy Bowen. Well, Lucy is a play therapist, and she's not only that, but she's the pioneer to bring play therapy to India. She's the founder of the Play Therapy Association in India. Lucy, it's such a joy to have you chat with me today. Thank you so much. So as we begin, Lucy, would you share with us, a bit of your journey and what led you to India and even starting the association?
Yeah, so I'm a play therapist from the UK, and my passion has always been working with children. I've worked with children in various contexts for about 17 years. And I first came to India when I was actually studying my undergraduate, and I came kind of on a yearly basis and did a lot of volunteer work. And I just absolutely fell in love with India and felt that, play therapy is something that's very much needed in India. So I have my undergraduate, my BSc in social science with a psychology major, and I have my MSc in play and therapeutic play. So I relocated to India following my master's in 2014. And that's when I started working as a play therapist at an autism center in Bangalore. And so during this time, there was more parents and more organizations starting to kind of become aware of my work, and there began to be a demand for play therapy and my work across India. So I started conducting training programs in 2015, and that's when the National Association for Play Therapy India was launched. And we had the aim that we wanted to provide play therapy training and services throughout India. So we're a registered NGO, and we run a number of community projects in Bangalore, as well as providing training in all the major cities throughout India. And as well as India, we've also branched out into Maldives, Bangladesh, Nepal, Cambodia, and the Middle East as well. So obviously, due to COVID, we're not really able to conduct our face-to-face training at the moment, but we do have a number of online programs which draw participants not only from India, but from across the world.
Wow. I mean, that is so cool to hear. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what this is all about, right? So let's get to that, right? Could you help decode that for us? Like play therapy, why therapy attached? Because when we say therapy, it sounds like an intervention, right? And oftentimes we don't think of play as something like that. So would you help decoding that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is an intervention. Play therapy is essentially a form of psychotherapy that uses play, which is the child's natural mode of communication, to help them resolve or manage their issues. So when we think about traditional forms of therapy, talk therapy, that's something that can be very intimidating for a child. And that can actually cause added stress to them rather than actually resolve any issues that a child might be facing. So play, because we're using play, and it's about forming a very strong therapeutic relationship through play as well, it provides this safe place for a child to explore and to learn about the world without judgment. So it offers a mode of expression that's familiar and more comfortable to the child. Very often children don't have the words to describe their feelings or to describe their experiences, but play is something which is natural for a child. So play, essentially, it's the child language, and the toys become the child's words. So children can actually express themselves through play, and it bypasses the expectations that they actually need to put these experiences into words. And furthermore, because we're using play, because we're using toys, children can actually express themselves through the use of symbols and metaphors as well. And this provides them with a safe distance from possible traumatic material. So children might not necessarily be able to tell you that they feel sad because their parents are arguing, or that they might have experienced some form of abuse, but they might be able to model this in their role play or through the use of puppets. And this then, it provides them with that safe distance from that material. and it can also provide an avenue of decontextualization of issues, as well as actually provide access to the unconscious as well.
Yeah, I mean, so what I'm gathering is that because play is something so basic to a child, right? A child doesn't really need to learn the language of play in a sense,
Yeah.
like whatever play, like, so even if it's a regressed, what we would call that sort
Yeah.
of play, or if it's like a really cognitive side of play, like whatever play they come with, you're actually able to communicate through that or just understand the child through how they're playing.
Yeah, that's
Right?
right. That's absolutely it. Because all play has some kind of meaning and forms some kind of purpose. Even if we think about a child who's engaging in free play or their open-ended play, whatever they're playing out or whatever they're exploring, that will in some way have a relation to their lives. I mean, if you take the COVID situation right now, you'll find that a lot of children are engaging in much more medical play. A lot more doctors and nurses come through in their play because that's something that they're experiencing. You know, children play out power and control. They experiment with identity and with roles. Everything that they play in some way has some kind of meaning or serves some kind of purpose. You know, like you said, sometimes children regress in their play. So we might have children who can engage in pretend play, they can engage in role play, but sometimes they might have, say, early developmental trauma, or they might have missed some stages of development. They might come into the play therapy room and engage in a lot of sensory play because that really helps them to regulate, that really helps to, build the brain from the bottom up, essentially. And sometimes when children have gone through a traumatic experience, then they get stuck in a fight or flight mode, which means they're not able to access the higher level, the higher parts of their brain and engage in a more cognitive manner that talk therapy would require. So when they engage in sensory play, which is very soothing, very, very repetitive, that helps them to regulate themselves, and that then they can actually access the more higher levels of the brain, which enables them to engage in more kind of cognitive and productive play.
Wow. So we're also talking about regulation and body regulation, self-regulation through
Yeah,
play.
absolutely. Because a lot of the children that we would deal with in play therapy, well, on one hand, we might be dealing with children who have experienced trauma, in which case, before they're able to work through the trauma, through their play, which they'll very often play out when they engage in pretend play. Sometimes, you know, as I said, if we are stuck in that fight or flight mode, the child first needs to regulate the body, regulate their mind so that they can access that. And, you know, that's why it's so important as well that we give these opportunities for children to engage in the different types of play, because if the child is stuck in that fight flight mode, it's not going to be that they can't only engage in higher levels of play, they're not be able to engage in higher levels of cognitive activities like learning and social interaction as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point. I think we're going to get to that even in my further questions. I'm going to ask you more about it. But let's talk about, how does play have a positive impact on a child?
Yeah, so play has many therapeutic powers. As we know, play is, you know, essential for the child's learning and development, but it's so much more than that. You know, it's therapeutic in terms of our emotional well-being as well. You know, first and foremost, you know, play can be therapeutic due to its actual very nature. Play is something which is fun. It doesn't have a set expectation. It's child-led. So it therefore increases confidence. It allows for free expression and the discovery of the self. And it also enables us to release stress and negative feelings, as well as actually learn about ourselves and the world around. And play also facilitates communication. Now, it provides an avenue for expression. It can provide access to the unconscious, as I've mentioned, and also allows for both direct and indirect teaching to take place. And, you know, on top of that, there's just so many benefits. Play also enhances social relationships. It provides an opportunity for children to develop empathy and social skills. And through play, children can also increase their personal strengths. So play builds resilience. Play helps children to develop a healthy self-esteem. Through play, children learn to self-regulate. They learn to problem solve. And, you know, most importantly, it fosters emotional wellness. You know, it promotes positive emotions, and it helps children, well, even adults, to actually relieve the stress of everyday pressures.
Yeah, I mean, play is so multifold, right? I mean, there's so much you can do with play. And what about, like, can play be negative in the sense, can it have a negative impact on a child?
So no, I would say no. Well, especially not when we're talking about traditional play in terms of play with toys and materials. If we were going to go and start talking about gaming and online play, I think that would be a completely different topic. But, when we're talking about traditional play, playing with the toys, playing with materials, dressing up, sensory play, we're only going to see positive benefits. Play is how children learn and develop. And the more children get to play, the more benefits you'll actually see. And it's when children don't get the opportunities to play that you'll see negative impacts such as behavioral issues and skill deficits. And in terms of negative impacts, when we're looking in terms of observing children's play and play therapy, the only thing that we generally have to keep a lookout is that when children are replaying their possible traumatic experiences, we need to be sure that they are only playing it out and that their projections stay in relation to the play and that they don't actually dissociate and actually re-experience the trauma when they're engaging in the play. It's important that when we're working in a therapeutic environment, that whatever they are playing out does remain in the present and in the context of the play. That's the only thing that in terms of play therapy we have to observe.
I think that's really, maybe you can help us understand. So two things. One is traumatic. I hear a lot of traumatic experiences, right? So what are what traumatic experiences do kids go through, or that you would call traumatic?
Well, really, it's dependent on the child's interpretation of any situation, because, really trauma is when the system becomes overwhelmed, when we're not able to process or make sense of things that have happened to us. And, we can think of trauma in terms of abuse. So it could be sexual abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be neglect. It could be bullying, children being bullied at school. It could be too much pressure. It's not always intentional. Sometimes too much pressure or expectation from the parents could have a traumatic effect on the child. It could be, living through the COVID situation right now can be traumatic for some children. Having too much pressure and expectation. So say, for example, a child with autism who's forced to go to a lot of different therapies that they really don't enjoy, that could have a traumatic experience. It could be witnessing your parents fighting. It could be observing a car crash or a natural disaster. Any of these things could have kind of a traumatic effect on the child.
Yeah, okay. And I think sometimes we can sort of even overlook it, right? Because I feel like there could be certain things that could be traumatic for them, but we don't necessarily as adults see it as traumatic, right?
No, absolutely. Sorry, I was going to say, and I think sometimes from my experience in India, that there is a lot of, abuse sounds like a strong word, but, it's to say that anything that has a negative impact on the child's emotional well-being is essentially having an abusive effect, even though it's not intentional. And I think that a lot of the time, the focus on academics, the focus, to learn to get a child to sit at the table and learn to read and write from a very, very young age, and not providing the child with enough opportunities to engage in play, or having too much expectation, or forcing them to do all these extra classes that they maybe don't enjoy. These can often have a traumatic effect on the child and affect the child's emotional well-being. And that might not always be observable during childhood, but it can sometimes lead to mental health issues in adulthood as well.
Now with the whole current situation where the kids are at home, like they used to go to school, but now they're at home, and parents have sort of taken on this responsibility of an educator, a parent, like everything is, so what are some of the suggestions or tips that you would give us as parents as we engage with our kids? Are there some observations, and what can we do with those observations? Just how do we engage with our kids?
I mean, the most important thing really would be to engage in as much play as possible. Even if you're looking at young children, children under the age of 5, the majority of the curriculum should anyway be play-based. Children that age are not designed to stay still. They require play, they require movement. And if you're looking at maybe slightly older children, obviously they're going to have a curriculum, they're going to have set lesson plans to follow. But it's really important to balance those structured activities with unstructured activities to help children to actually regulate themselves. Children are going to be experiencing a variety of emotions during these stressful times, and these emotions will manifest in behaviors. All behavior is a form of communication. So, if a child doesn't want to do an hour of maths, it's likely that they're not just trying to be awkward, rather they're struggling with the situation and they're maybe not able to communicate this. And sensory play is something that's really great for grounding and for regulation. Children can't get out and about, so the opportunities to move are less. So we need to kind of create these opportunities at home. And, engaging in sensory play is something that's really great because it comes without any expectation to perform in a specific manner. So it allows children to experience control over their bodies and their environment, which helps in reducing anxiety as well. Because what we have to understand, with the whole COVID situation itself is that this is actually a traumatic event. And we get so much of this kind of left brain information, which comes from the news, from the social media. It's really important for us as adults as well as children that we can actually engage in creative activities where we can process and express and regulate our emotions. So things like messy play, art, Play-Doh, we can make some musical instruments or sensory bottles, have a dance party, just really simple things that are fun and allow us to connect with each other at a time when we're actually lacking connection from the social world. The world really, it's quite a scary place at the moment. And, another power of play is that it actually provides children with a sanctuary of safety. So in play, children can actually play out and make sense of their experiences. And when they're engaging in play, children can actually control the outcomes. We can't always control what's happening outside, but in our play, we can control the outcome. So this actually helps children to build their confidence and actually reduce anxiety over what's happening outside in the world as well. And obviously, when we let children play and we actually encourage parents to play with their own children, this also benefits the parents as well. Because, not only does it actually strengthen the relationship between the parents and the child, but, it also provides that stress relief for parents, simply enjoying time together with their child rather than focusing on the pressures of homeschooling and academics. Children will have time to catch up on academics when school starts back, but actually working from home, children being at home, parents actually have that rare opportunity to spend quality time connecting with their children right now, which they might not get during, in other circumstances.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Now, when we talk about observations, right, like when we play with our children, like we mentioned, right, in their role play or when they're doing something, there could be something odd that pops up, right? Or so what are some of the observations that, we should have when we are playing, or just like keep at the back of our mind to be aware of? Yeah.
So children will use play to express themselves. So generally parents will try to follow the child's lead and to facilitate the child's expression rather than impose their own ideas onto the child. And you'll see that the common themes in children's play could be things like power and control, anger, loss, confusion, self-esteem, nurture, identity, protection, trust, relationships. Essentially, the child will explore their world, their feelings and experiences while they engage in play. And this is completely normal and healthy play. So normal play will generally have a resolution at the end of it. Now, for example, a princess is captured, but then she gets rescued at the end. So the child is finding a resolution. However, if you see themes that are very, very persistently negative and often go around in a loop without resolution. For example, the princess is captured, but nobody can ever save her. The situation is completely hopeless. Or if you see things like intense fear, sexualized play, aggression, rage, trickery, abandonment, violation, these kind of things, if these kind of things are kind of repeatedly coming up in the child's play, then that could be a sign of some form of trauma or abuse. And that will likely be accompanied by other signs in the child's general behavior as well. The child might often appear anxious or angry or withdrawn, for example.
Yeah, those are good points. Thank you, Lucy. So now let's talk about children with special needs, right? So how does play therapy help kids with special needs?
So play therapy can be really especially beneficial to children with special needs in many ways. Firstly, when children just engage in play, it works on their holistic development. So developmentally, it can help children with special needs develop cognition, fine and gross motor skills, social skills, emotional regulation. And secondly, it's through the play that the child discovers who they are and they learn about the world around. So play helps children to connect to their environment. And, when a child with special needs attends play therapy, we're of course trained and attuned to recognize the child's stage of play, their level of needs, and we build and expand on their needs, on their interests, to basically build their essential skills. So we help children to connect with their environment, to develop an independent interest, which is something really, really important, to engage and interact, to develop communication skills, emotional regulation, to become more flexible and adaptable. So essentially, through therapeutic play with children with special needs, we facilitate the child in learning skills which they require to engage independently throughout their lives, essentially.
Yeah, that's good. So would you like to share with us a story about just one of your interactions with a child, or just a story that you'd like to share with us?
Sure, I'm just going to share a story. It's actually about an adult. So It's actually just to highlight the importance of engaging in play with your children, and also to show that also it's not limitless, and also to show the value of how important sensory play is. So this isn't a project in the special needs school in Bangalore, but the school also had adults, because one of the schools where they finish school, but then there's nowhere else for them to go, essentially. So the school let adults continue to attend. So myself and my team were conducting sessions at the school, and there was the one class which they, for want of a better term, they termed as the more low functioning class, where it's mostly non-verbal children with very much lack of awareness, not much independent engagement. And this class was full of mostly children, but there was one man in the class. He was around 40 years old, so I'm going to call him M. Okay, so M used to sit all day, every day in the corner of the classroom. And he sat facing the wall on a chair, clinging his little lunch bag, and just looking at the wall, essentially, until he goes and eats his lunch, comes back from lunch and sits in the same thing. So he was very little engagement, no interaction, very high anxiety, no confidence at all. And obviously, as the rest of the class were mostly non-verbal, very less interest and engagement in the environment. So we started with sensory play. So we started bringing in different materials, different shaving foam, paint, rice, dal, maida, corn flour. Each week we have some different materials for them to explore. And one-to-one, we started trying to involve M in the class. So we just come and very slowly, maybe rub the shaving foam, shake the rice and the dal, just to get him to start to become interested. And slowly, as we started to rub the foam, this little smile will start to build on his face. And after a few sessions, he actually put down his lunch bag. And because he holds his lunch bag for so much, his fingers were literally seized in this position. But slowly, as the sessions progressed, he started to touch and explore the different materials. He started to gain more movement in his hands. He started to smile. And after a couple of months in working in the class, if we'd enter into the room, he'd put down his lunchbox, he'd jump off of the seat, he'd actually say hi, he'd start waving, and he'd start engaging in that interactive sensory-based play with us. So it's almost like no one had ever engaged him in this type of play. So they just deemed that he was pretty much, very low functioning, not able to do anything. But as soon as we started to engage in the sensory play, it's almost like the switch just flicked on and he just totally came to life. He became more confident, more interactive, more engaged. And it was just, just shows the magic of, firstly, how important sensory play is for building our confidence and our awareness. It also shows how it's never too late to engage in play. And also, I think, shows that the negative impacts not engaging your children in play can have in terms of skill deficits and things. So that was just one little story that I wanted to share with you.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. And definitely, if it can impact him, it can impact any child, it can impact all of us.
Definitely.
Right?
So it's never too late to engage in play. And I think that's something that's really important when you're talking about special needs children, because very often special needs parents say that my child doesn't know how to play, or they just engage in repetitive play, spinning wheels, lining up items and objects. They're not interested to play with toys. And I think I know that people who've done my training and things know that I'm a massive advocate for sensory play, because I think in terms of play, there's a big lack of understanding that sensory play is actually the foundation for all the child's learning and development. So very often parents give children toys and they think that they don't know how to play. And that's because we have to first start from sensory play. Because when we give toys, I have a toy in front of me, but toys or anything is distinctly separate from us. But when we engage in sensory play and messy play, that's how we get connected to the environment. That's how we start to develop an awareness of the world around us. And that's how we actually get engaged. So actually playing with toys and materials is something that comes later, once the child develops the understanding of themselves and the world through involving in sensory play. So if you think that your child doesn't know how to play, then start with sensory play.
I think that's bang on. Like, I'm an advocate for sensory play as well. And but honestly, sensory play isn't the easiest on parents, because it is messy and it's just all over the place, and we have to be mentally prepared for all of that. But I was just in one of my previous episodes, I chatted with a mom, Karen, and she sort of brought up the idea to be open to be disrupted. Open as parents to be interrupted by disruptive play or messy play, right? And I think, like you so rightly mentioned, that just the whole the positives that sensory play has on kids cannot be underestimated.
No, it's the most important type of play. It's the most important type of play from every angle, really, in my opinion, because it is the foundation for all learning and development. Because, in terms of building our confidence, in terms of discovering the body, in terms of learning about the world, our world's only as big as what we've been exposed to. So the more we get exposed to, the more things to see, the more things to hear, the more things to touch, then our world becomes bigger. So when we go into new situations, we're able to process and make sense of what's happening around us. And, sensory play lets us actually have control over the world, have control over our body. So that also reduces anxiety. The properties of things like shaving foam and everything, they're so soothing. They help us with self-regulation as well. So, even for children who have gone through trauma or abuse, again, it can really help to regulate the nervous system and help us to become more engaged. It helps with focus. It helps with concentration. Just the benefits of sensory play are just never ending.
Your face lit up with sensory play.
I can talk about sensory play for the whole day.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lucy. How would you what would you like to encourage the parents out there listening to you right now?
Just play with your children as much as possible, because it's just, the most important thing that you can do to help with the overall development of your child, to build your relationship, to help them to become emotionally healthy adults, as well as develop, a vast array of skills that they're going to use throughout their whole lives. Yeah, play as much as possible. And don't be afraid to make a mess.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lucy, for chatting with me today.